Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zen Mindset Immersion class. This is Module 8. This is Samu, which means work, period. So the definition of work is an activity involving mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or result. Typically, Zen is seen as a goalless practice, which is a hard concept for a lot of people to understand, and it's actually the first time I'm talking about this in this class. But Zen is technically goalless because we're so accustomed to always be in achievement mode and aspiring for a goal. The goal is simple in Zen, right? You're sitting here and you're letting go of thought and you're basically doing the most simplest task a human can do, which is sitting still and silent. But yet a lot of us, even in the midst of that, want to always be achieving something, gaining enlightenment. But when it comes to work, typically there are results that we're working towards, and that's obviously okay. The Zen idea of work and a dedicated work period is a really interesting one in relation to the modern working world, which is why I want to build this class, right? I want to bring Zen concepts to the modern working world for the modern working people that involves technology and all the sort of trappings of a modern society. And one of the most famous Zen sayings in relation to work is chop wood, carry water. And what that saying is essentially saying is the task is simple. Chop the wood, carry the water. Don't overthink it. Now, easier said than done because that quote was given probably at a time when jobs were simpler, life was simpler than they are now. It's pretty complicated and complex with technology and whatnot, easily distractible. But again, the point of this class is to establish a Zen mindset and have it translate to your everyday working life. And so you don't have to become a monk, but if you could take some of these concepts and some of these mindsets and consciously be thinking about it during your workday, they can become very valuable. So the idea of chop wood, carry water is nothing more, nothing less. This is the essence of life, right? We do have to take action. We do have to work. We can't just sit around doing nothing all day. And so if we are going to choose to do work, we should have the right mindset around it. It doesn't mean you have to stay at the same job for your whole life. It doesn't mean you can't at times be disgruntled and feel what you're feeling. It doesn't mean you can't be annoyed with a boss or things that obviously come up with between coworkers and all different types of scenarios. But if you could come back to the basics of a work period, you could cut through a lot of the noise and stick to the task at hand. So one of the things that this is really designed to do is to cut down the ego. It's the first time I've mentioned that word in this class. And I find it interesting that I'm just mentioning it now halfway through. But the ego is a big part of the problem that we experience when we have challenges with work. Why is that? I should get a raise. I should be spoken to nicer. I deserve better. You know, it's like I, me. Again, nothing wrong with that. But if the ego starts to become problematic, especially with your mindset and how you're approaching your work, then it needs to be addressed and to be looked at. And so one of the ways that we could avoid getting sucked into that sort of ego state of mind is considering time, believe it or not. So there's a technique called the Pomodoro technique, which has become pretty popular in sort of modern day working environments, which is 25 to 40-minute intervals. When we do Samu and work period on retreat, they're typically 40 minutes. And usually a bell is rang by the lead monk, and that signifies the start of the work period. And for me personally, I oftentimes was given the task of cleaning the Zendo or the Dojo, the main meditation hall. I a lot of times was in the kitchen chopping vegetables or washing vegetables. I've had to rake leaves and sweep paths and clean bathrooms and wash windows. And so you start at the beginning of this period when the bell rings, and then you drop everything when the bell rings again. It's sort of, again, like Zazen with the bells ringing at the beginning and at the end. It's sort of like school. But for that period of time, single pointed focusedness, full attention on the task at hand, no distractions, right? So if we can get into this habit during our workday of having dedicated, even if they're shorter intervals, I think we'll find ourselves to be more productive throughout the day, as opposed to maybe going with the old school approach, which is I get to work at 9, I clock in, I don't really consciously think about the way I'm spending my time and my hours, and I clock out at 5, right? Maybe I take a lunch break for a half hour, 45 minutes in the middle of the day. But if you're just kind of coasting through your day, you're not going to be mindful, you're not going to be engaged, you're not going to be overly productive. But if you could take the concept of Samu and these dedicated work periods and take the Pomodoro technique and method, now you could start to say, okay, for the next 25 minutes, next 35 minutes, next 40 minutes, let me just fully immerse myself in work. Let me drop my ego and let me just do the job. Let me chop wood and carry water. It really becomes very simple when you boil it down and you remove your own personal opinion and ego out of the situation. While doing research for this topic, I came up with an interesting little piece of information that the average human basically does 90,000 hours of work over the course of their life. I mean, that is a lot of time to be spent in your career, in work. 90,000 hours. The average of happiness and contentment in work in 2022 and 2023, now closing in on 2024, is actually declining. So as a society, we're working longer and more hours, and we are having less fulfillment and contentment with our work. That is a troubling trend, and it's one that can be improved upon, at least individually. Society-wide, it would be very idealistic of me to think, okay, I could get millions of people to follow this class and these techniques, and everything can start trending in an upward direction. That would be fantastic. I am going to strive for that. However, I would much prefer that you, as the individual taking this class, you take it upon yourself to change your relationship to work. And if that requires you leaving a job, changing an environment, so you can find more happiness, more productivity, more contentment, more focus, then do that. If you don't have the ability to leave your job, well then when you're there, try maybe these shorter interval periods where you're immersing yourself fully in the task at hand. As I mentioned, higher turnover rates, higher churn, higher unhappiness, more discontent. These are all troubling signs. So some of the problems that are coming from people not being engaged at work is decreased productivity, lack of focus, missed deadlines, increase of errors, poor quality of work, strained relationships, and increased stress and anxiety. When you're fully engaged with work, you have decreased stress, lower burnout, improved collaboration, increased productivity, higher engagement, more consistency, more purpose, and sustained commitment across the board. So once again, I don't expect you to just take this and implement it immediately 100%, but you could see that slow incremental steps can lead to big results. So thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next module.